Hello and welcome to the public event, Elections in Armenia, Reflections on the Election Campaign and Predictions for Election Day, organized by the European Platform for Democratic Elections. My name is Maria Titizian, and I am the editor-in-chief of EVN Report. I will be moderating today's discussion, which is being publicly broadcast in English with Armenian translation. The European Platform for Democratic Elections is a network of 15 independent European citizen election observation organizations with member organizations in Eastern Partnership countries and several EU member states who conduct and support independent citizen election observation. Transparency International and Helsinki Citizens Assembly Vanator are EPDE's members from Armenia. Joining me to discuss the campaign, the role of the media, political tensions, and other important events taking place, I have the honor of being with two media veterans in Armenia, Boris Navasartian. He is the president of Yerevan Press Club, a position he's held since 1995, and Levon Barserian, founder and chairman of the Council of the Aspares Journalists Club in Gyumri, Armenia. Welcome, Boris and Levon, thank you. June 20th, Armenian citizens are heading, as we know, to early elections, Election Day. The campaign has been marred by a lot of, I would say, violent rhetoric, a lot of blaming, not a lot of discussion about the programs of the parties. Boris, in your sort of estimation, you have been following elections for many, many years, decades, I would say, in Armenia. What do you consider to be the current state of the election campaign? We have, 72 hours left.
Thank you, Maria, for introduction. I think, first of all, we have to give certain formula for these elections. And I think the main one, which is agreed by majority of our public, is that this is the competition between the past and the present. Almost nobody from the competitors can provide necessary vision of the future. And that is why the voters have to make choice between the past, before the Velvet Revolution in 2018, with all its positive and negative circumstances, and the present, which contains also several challenges, like defeat of Armenia in the 44 days war, with economic and social crisis, but in the same time with certain hopes which are coming from April, May 2018, when the revolutionary group had promised radical changes in the life of the country. And what is interesting, that still quite majority of the society, or quite many, big part of the society, are still thinking that these 3 years were not a failure, that these 3 years were certain kind of unsuccessful attempt of giving the end to the past. And there still are some hopes that what was promised 3 years ago will happen after these elections. And this is mostly the electorate of the ruling party, civil contract, while the political forces that are representing the past, and first of all the Alliance Armenia, headed by the second president of Armenia, Robert Kocharan, tries to help the public to recall how successful was the country in the 10 years, during the 10 years of his presidency, from 98 to 2008, when indeed in Armenia there was significant economic growth, when we can say that the quality of the management was quite good, and public institutions were working in a disciplined manner. All those factors are missing now. However, still many people in Armenia remember that during these 10 years we had backlash in terms of democracy and human rights. And also these 10 years were a real start of losing by Armenia of its sovereignty, because a huge part of Armenian economy was given under the control of Russia. And also in terms of security, Armenia had to fully rely on this strategic ally. Nothing essentially changed during the last years, and so the choice of the people is really very hard.
And indeed, thank you, Boris. Recent polling suggests that about 35 to 40% of the electorate is undecided, disillusioned. They don't know who to vote for. So these are serious problems for election day and to predict the outcome of the election. Levon, Boris talked about that these elections are really about the past and the present. Perhaps we could say authoritarian versus democratic values. And we're seeing this being put into the narrative of the public discourse, right? And the other discourse that we're seeing is that the real campaign is between the two forces, Pashinyan civil contract and Kocharyan's Armenia alliance. How do you see sort of the process, the discourse of the campaign as we head into election day in a few days?
Hi everybody, thank you very much for this invitation. I think some layer of population, not the tiny layer of population, thinking that this new government failed a lot of promises and revolutionary agenda, what expected by the people. For 3 years, implemented very few from the possible. And this is, of course, I agree that this is some battle between future and the past. But from the side of past, we have two participants in this election. And this is not only the ally with Kocharyan, this is the ally with Republican Party as well. And I think that a lot of people talking that they trying to come back because they understood that if the revolutionary agenda will be implemented, a lot of them will be charged, and maybe maybe they will lose their property. And this is one of the reasons why they are so active and so aggressive against not only to the ruling party. We are hearing the very harsh narrative against the democracy and the human rights. This is not a new talk. For a long time, for maybe more than 20 years, we have heard that officials usually use this language and say that, you know, the democracy and human rights usually against the national security, which is very artificial contradiction of these values. And guys, please wait for the victory against our enemies, and the later will be the time for the democracy and human rights. This narrative was for a long time, and now for last 7 months we are hearing much more about this, and this is in their narratives, in their campaigning agenda in core. That democracy destroyed the country. The defeating of Armenia was because of the democracy, because of the revolution, and some comparisons we are hearing with Georgia. You know, in Georgia was the revolution and they lost Abkhazia and Ossetia. In Ukraine was the revolution. You see, they lost Donbass and Crimea. No, this is our losses because of the revolution, guys. we need the time for the strong, some quasi-dictator or authoritarian ruling style, and this is general way for these two allies for revenging, maybe for coming back. And ruling party promising all the things what he promised 3 years ago, and now just the changings in their words that the Velvet Revolution will be changed to the Iron or Steel Revolution. So this is general contradiction agenda among these two sides. But I want to say that after December of 2018, in these 2.5 years, a lot of people disappointed with this new government, and they decided to vote to other parties, not for formers, but to the others. This is general overview. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Boris, Levon spoke about, sort of the rise of authoritarian voices and trends, and yet we could possibly argue that these elections are the most competitive elections ever. We need to remember that they're taking place in the post-war situation in the country. We have close to 25, 26 parties and alliances of parties that are competing, and even though the former regime representatives right after the war were demanding the immediate resignation of Pashinyan and an interim technocratic government to come into place, they have chosen to take part in these early elections. Aside from the war, are there other factors at play here, or is everything about security versus democracy? What are the other factors? I mean, people are still traumatized, we have to admit, are very confused, very undecided, as we know. But are there other factors at play here in these elections?
I think that still the issue of security and challenges of quite deep internal crisis, they probably not reject but demand authoritarian style. And that is why among those candidates, the public was looking for exactly authoritarian leaders. And that is why, as an outcome, we have these two guys who are running for the leading position in the Armenian government. I mean, Nikol Pashinyan and Robert Kocharian. Both proved that they are authoritarian, with, in the same time, different ideologies and different ideas that they were sharing with the public. And what is interesting, you mentioned that the choice is between these two. But look, if we analyze the previous political developments in Armenia, including parliamentary elections in 2018, then hardly Robert Kocharian, for instance, could be considered as the main challenger of Nikol Pashinyan, because his alliance consists of two political parties. One of them is new, and the other one was less successful in the previous elections among those representing the past. It was far behind Prosperous Armenia. It was behind Republican Party, but now with Robert Kocharian heading them, they are favorites, one of two favorites.
You're referring to the ARS.
Which is interesting phenomenon, because as we see from analyzing this interesting setup, that people are really need someone who is decisive, who will be consistent in implementing its goals. And that is why Robert Kocharian is the main challenger to the current government. Also, it is important that the election is, although we say it is parliamentary elections, but in fact it is election of personalities. This comes from the specifics of Armenian constitution, because the position of prime minister is even stronger than before the change in the Armenian constitution, when we had presidential republic. Now prime minister, according to our main law, has more authority than the president before. And his position is less vulnerable than the position of the president because there are no limits for the terms of being in the office. If the presidents could be in the office twice for 5 years, now the prime minister can stay as long as his political force is winning parliamentary elections. And that is why people indeed are choosing between the two personalities, but not between the two political forces. That's another interesting phenomenon of that elections. And when we are speaking about predictions, I would make probably a very brave conclusion. That if, for instance, something fantastic happens, and Robert Kocharan and Nikol Pashinyan form an alliance, then I think they would lose the alliance, uniting all other political forces if that happens. But this does not mean that the other political forces have chances, because there are many, and people who go to the precinct, they do not want to spend their votes for a political force that has no chances to pass a threshold. And that is when, since we have 26, the risk that you are voting for someone who will not be in the parliament, your participation in the election is senseless. And that is why the votes are kind of a bit artificially concentrated for the two favorites who have 100% chances for passing into the new parliament. That is also a very interesting phenomenon. Unfortunately, the other political parties and groups were unable to consolidate on the basis of common platforms. Although I would say that there are at least two platforms that would get quite solid support of Armenian public. One is, let's say, National Democratic, and another one Liberal Democratic. So few parties that could join in one or another alliance would have quite high chances. But a kind of selfish approach to the politics, and I would even say irresponsibility in announcing political ambitions, but doing nothing to support them with real hard political work. And that is why we had the setup which I tried to describe.
Thank you. Thank you, Boris. Levon, Boris spoke about election of personalities, and we have seen in the Armenian political landscape since independence, it's always been about the leader of the party, whether under a presidential system and now under a parliamentary system. I want you to explain to our viewers, in your opinion, what are some of the main campaign strategies of the parties? For instance, we've been seeing Nikol Pashinyan walking around with a hammer in his hand and changing his rhetoric and going from velvet to the steel approach, although people are saying it's 3 years too late for that. And then on the other hand, we're seeing a very slick campaign being run by the Armenia Alliance, more positive messaging sometimes, although that's also changing. And then I have the Honor Alliance, which is the Republican Party and Artur Vanetsyan, with a lot of very negative commercials, negative campaigning. So talk to us about these different strategies and how you think they will impact citizens' decision when they go to the polls.
Mm-hmm. Of course, voting in Armenia from early 90s was the persons-based voting process, and usually people are not going in deep in their programs. if they have programs. If I may call their documents programs or roadmaps or strategies, what and how they will build the country for the future. And people are still voting for the persons. If we will imagine remove these first positions from all these candidates, the picture will be very much worse, and a lot of people will not recognize which party is this and who is, what are they telling, what are they promising, what are their approach. Which one is their position in the political landscape? Are they lefts or rights, or even some political parties cannot recognize themselves in the field, in the political field. About the strategies, I'm not ready to call their approaches as a strategy, how they are fighting for the votes of the people. And this is a battle between the current power holders and former power holders. Of course, we have another third group, new political parties, so-called young political parties, and some other parties who are participating now, and they hope that they will successful. Of course, there is a competition. But this big number of participants will disappear hopes and votes of general part of them. Unfortunately, ruling party was not ready to change the electoral code initially in core. Since 2016, when this new electoral code was developed, a civil society group of some organizations suggested a lot of radical changes in the electoral code. Similar suggestions were demanded in 2018, August, September. All the things was very much clear, explained to the new government, but unfortunately, until now, and society knows that some general condition was changed only. This is one of general failures. What I mean, for example, we suggested to reduce the entrance level until to the one mandate. It is approximately 1%. That could provide these new and small parties with little influences to be in the parliament with 1, 2, 3, or 4 mandates. But this condition, 5%, is very problematic for these new political parties, and this will raise another problem in the after the voting, when only 4 or maximum 5 political parties can or allies can entrance to the parliament, and this is very problematic, and people will vote for persons and for the future or for the past. This is general approach to the general public. It is very problematic to find in the programs something effective how to ruling out the country from this catastrophic situation where we are now.
I have too many questions and not enough time, I think. We have some questions from the audience, but before we get to that, I just want to ask if you can briefly, Boris, talk about, obviously, these elections are, yes, about the past and the present, authoritarianism versus democracy. It's also very much about democracy versus security, right? What, aside, are these the core political disagreements and tensions? Are there personal vendettas or scores being settled with these elections?
First of all, I want to understand whether we have consensus about the formula, the competition between the past and present, because Levon several times mentioned past and future. Did you mean future or?
Yeah. Yes,
you meant future.
Expectation of the people, expectations of the people for radical changes.
Okay, I mean past and present because Otherwise, I would say the electorate would be much more active than it is now, because my understanding is that neither the present nor the past is something about what people are dreaming. And that is why the choice is so difficult now. And I also want to apologize for not responding to your question about competitiveness of this election. They are unprecedented competitive for the parliamentary elections. If we would compare with presidential elections, then we had competitive presidential elections several times. I would say all presidential elections in Armenia were competitive. But when we are talking about the history of parliamentary elections, then indeed, in most of the cases, the parliamentary elections were very predictable, either through real public support or through strong administrative resource. We were sure that this or that political force will win. Maybe the only exception is the first, more or less, the pluralistic Armenian elections in 1990, when it was not clear whether the communists will keep the power or new, let's say, revolutionary democratic movement will win, but then at least trend was clear. If not in 1990, then at least immediately later, the communists would give the power to the new political force. Now, it is not clear who will, for instance, be the next one, especially that traditionally we are thinking that snap elections are becoming a normality in Armenia. Yeah? So it is not clear that after these elections, who will be the next. About future, about the trends, political trends, it is not clear. And now I want to be back to your question, if you remind me, what was that?
I was asking, what are the core political disagreements and tensions?
Yes.
Are personal
Yes.
vendettas playing a role in the campaign?
Yes, I don't know how much our virtual audience is aware about recent developments in Armenia, but in fact, Nikol Pashinyan coming to power initiated criminal case against Robert Kocharan, who is his main competitor now, and Kocharan spent quite a long time in the jail through that criminal case, and it was related with 2008 March 1st events, when post-election protests brought to violence by the government, which was still headed then by leaving his office Robert Kocharan, and Nikol Pashinyan was one of the, let's say, victims of that violence. And so many people were considering the persecution against Kocharan as vendetta initiated by Pashinyan. And now it is clear, and some, let's say, political analysts and bloggers are thinking that Kocharan will never forget those days that he spent in jail, and he will try to make the same problems for Nikol Pashinyan if he comes to power. So these personal conflicts are a part of the general pre-election environment in Armenia. And the same refers, or not the same, but something very similar, refers to the circles around Robert Kocharan, the circles around Nikol Pashinyan, because both groups perfectly understand that this is the battle for their even personal security, for their prosperity, because of course, there are businesses behind both. If, let's say, in 2018, we could say that Nikol Pashinyan is leading really popular movement, now we know that there are businessmen and quite rich people that are more interested in his victory. And of course, this is well known also by Kocharan and his team, and they will try to punish those, let's say, influential businessmen who are backing Nikol Pashinyan. So all these circumstances are allowing us to say that yes, there is a lot of personal conflicts behind the whole process.
Thank you, Boris, for that very succinct response. There is a lot at stake in these elections, and I think it is important that we talk about election day itself on June 20th, Sunday. I don't know about you, gentlemen, but I'm preparing myself for the worst. Even though these are competitive elections, although campaigns were run, even 15 years ago, it's very difficult to stuff the ballot box. Most of the problem, if you will, most of the issues take place before, outside the precinct, with vote buying and voter intimidation. How much of this is a factor, do you think, in these elections, and what can we expect on election day?
Of course, the violations history in the elections of Armenia is the issue for large investigation for universities, for masters, and for other researchers. Of course, now more sophisticated techniques are using by the okay. Observation mission with Transparency International, and we are receiving a lot of information about the bribing, about the administrative abuses, and as we know, there is a criminal case, one criminal case connected with this 9 million drams bribe, and talks will be what we are hearing, that the cost for one vote could be reached to the $200 even. This is too much comparing for the bribing in 2017 and before. It was a time when a vote was just $2 20 years ago. Now this is talks about the $200. Of course, it's not easy to discover and investigate such cases, because usually such bribing process is going in the homes and houses or the backyards of the voters. But from another side, society is much more smarter and skilled on it, and the new generation rised up, and year by year and day by day, people understanding that violation in the elections is very big problem for the future of the country, and this losses in the war very much connected to the state capturing system what was in the country for more than 20 years. And another issue is administrative abuse, administrative resources abuse or misuses, not only from the state or local budgets companies. As we know, farmers who are controlling a lot of businesses in the country, controlling employees, if who knows, there is no real investigation, maybe 20% or 10-15% of employees in the Armenia related to these black money businesses, related to the corrupted former officials, and administrative abuses, as we had some evidences from 2017, could be used, will be used in these elections as well. And these are general two problems or challenges for the voting processes. Of course, criminal bodies will be used as well, but not so much and not so hard as it was before. As a representative of observation mission, I am remembering elections since early 2002, and elections in 2018, September Yerevan municipality elections and snap elections of parliament was definitely different from previous elections. There was no any noise, very few calls from polling stations to the call center, and it's very easy for us from the early hours of the 20th of June to understand what will be in the day of the in the voting day. And I think that violations will be, but not so much as expected some people. In this point, I want to mark proactive work of the prosecutor office now. I cannot promise that this work will be so effective as we're expecting, but as I'm understanding that they are ready to be proactive and discover immediately violations in this voting day.
Thank you. Boris, I'm going to ask you the same question, but before I do, you get a double question. It's from one of our viewers. Is it likely that no party or alliance will achieve a sufficient majority and that coalition negotiation will be necessary? If there is no agreement, then obviously we will have to go to a second round election. Do you think that that's a pretty strong possibility, taking into consideration some of the polling that we've seen and some of, you've been monitoring it? What do you think?
I will start with that. I think that equally possible are all those scenarios, both satisfactory victory of one of the political forces. I am not saying which one, for clear reason. Levon mentioned that he's part of observation mission. My organization is monitoring media, so we cannot show any, let's say, political bias or even through predictions. But as a general scenario, yes, I think both, it is possible that one of the political forces will get 50% plus. I think it is possible. It is possible that there will be coalition. It is possible that coalition negotiations will fail, because many political forces who are candidates for the third or fourth place, they're announcing that they don't want to form a coalition with any of the main competitors. And then it is possible that there will be the second round. And coming back to the previous question about election fraud and possible consequences after the voting day, I am optimistic about that, in terms that not optimistic about exclusion of fraud. There will be fraud during these elections. And firstly, because the institutions that are responsible for the free and fair elections are in a very bad shape. I mean, the electoral commissions are under strong political influences, local self-governance bodies are under strong political influences, police and national security bodies are under strong political influences, and the courts are under strong political influences of different camps. That's the main problem. So I think it is clear for everyone in Armenia that police and national security are under control of Pashinyan. However, the courts are rather controlled by the opposition. and we cannot expect objective behavior from these important institutions. That is why fraud is possible. But why I'm optimistic, it might sound strange, but I guess that the majority of Armenian public would be more tolerant to fraud than to conflicts after the confrontation after the elections. They would rather expect questionable results than civil war.
Interesting observation, but I have a follow-up question because it's, again, has to do with what you said.
And I want to stress that the main hope for more or less free and fair elections is about self-organization of the citizens, because indeed during these years the intolerance toward any lie, towards any falsification is quite strong among big part of our population. So I trust in this rather than institutions that should ensure free and fair elections.
Fair enough. One of the questions directed for you, what role does the media play in polarizing society?
Again, quite controversial response to that question. Media is not playing quite, I would say, is not playing separate role in this electoral process, because media is that or that way part of this or that political camp. So the behavior of media is continuation of the political struggle. It is not something separate from this process, watching everything and being objective. That's specific of our media market and media landscape. But in the same time, I see quite interesting phenomenon, but the beginning from June 7, when official promotion campaign started, majority of Armenian media tried to look civilized, tried to look impartial. And this is both through quite strict legal regulations for the broadcast media, and I would say a certain level of dignity of journalists who do not want to look as a side. And that is why through our monitoring results, I can say that before June 7, there was really biased coverage of the political competition. But after June 7, I see real attempts to be balanced and to provide all political forces opportunities to present their programs to the public. And that is why, despite this many parties and alliances participating in elections 26, we see that almost each of them are becoming more or less familiar for majority of the public who are following media. And in that sense, I can say that the level of civilized work of media is much higher than general characteristic of this pre-election campaign.
Thank you, Boris. I have a question from one of our viewers. It's an interesting question. I don't know how comfortable you feel answering it. It asks, what about the role of the military in the elections? According to the IRI, International Republican Institute polls, the military in general enjoys great support in society, but the military leadership doesn't. Can military influence the election results?
Influence of military or the army on the elections was significant for previous elections, and when we are accounting the share of the military voters, just voters, it was approximately 5-7%. This is significant when the competition is high, And this is unusual situation when the headquarter or some high-level officials of army are criticize the ruling party, but from another side, I think in this time it will be impossible to pressure regularly soldiers and the army in general for vote for ruling party as it was before the 2018. This is important, of course. This is 5-7% are very much significant, and of course the army servants votes very much connected to their relatives and families' approaches. What the family is thinking, what it is needed to do now, and they will decide together how to vote. And I want to come back, if I may, to the question related to the mass media. For a long time in the Armenia, ruling party control or ruling power control all broadcasting media. Maybe not controlled one or two of them, and immediately after the revolution the field was changed. Now a ruling party or the power controlling only 1-2 broadcasting media, this is public media, and all others under control of the oppositional parties or leaders or oligarchs, former oligarchs, and this is almost 3 years. And this is a media field when we are facing a lot of critics, labeling, shaming, harsh talk, hate speech against the ruling party, even before the revolution, even before the COVID pandemic. And they continue, of course, but when they are know that in the campaigning time period they are under monitoring from independent observers, from Yerevan Press Club and from State Commission, they are trying to have more or less balanced coverage of the elections and political candidates. And the problem was about the very much connected to the ownership, how this ownership rised for 20-25 years. It was very much needed to discover and investigate the ownership of concentrated in the hands of a lot of officials in the country for this last 2-3 decades, which was not done by this government, and now they are understanding their mistakes, of course. And about the campaign, unfortunately, of course, again, connected to this constitution and the electoral code, we have only 12 days for campaigning, and this is very short time period for the society to understand what are suggestions in the programs of main part of political parties. From 2 or 3 or 4 of them, more or less understandable from previous history, what are they saying about the our last, about our current situation and about the future. But it is very much interesting, even to me. I'm trying to understand what are they. I am discovering new political parties and new people in these parties as candidates. What are they thinking? What are they saying? And for the ordinary people, it is much more complicated to understand in these 12 days noise, political noise, and in the end to decide to vote or not. And in the end, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, people will make a pragmatic choice than ideological vote.
Interesting. Thank you, Levon. We need to wrap up, but I do want, and I will give each of you a few minutes to sort of present your concluding remarks. But Boris, you said that you are fairly optimistic about election day. There will be vote rigging and vote buying and some intimidation, but overall that you were optimistic. What do you think is going to happen on June 21, the day after?
I would say relatively optimistic, not very optimistic. Both main competitors are planning huge manifestations, both immediately before the Silence Day on 17th and on 18th, and immediately after. And the squares, and the main squares of Yerevan are already booked for several days after the voting days. But I hope that majority of people would prefer not to go to these manifestations and participate in clashes, because they will happen in the same time, the events of the competitor, but rather watch football games of the European Championship.
Levon, are you going to be watching football on Monday?
I'm not sure. I'm not football fan. Yeah, I'm not. It's not easy for me to sit in the chair and looking how 22 people running for the ball. Yeah, and. These orders for the occupation of main squares in Yerevan since 21 June is much more psychological step than realistic. But of course, oppositional candidate or candidates will complain the results. Of course, they will demand, they will make rallies, they will marching around the streets of Yerevan. It's very much depends what kind of vote they will reach. If they will reach more than 25, maybe they will be much more committed to continue their struggle for the constitutional solution about the violations or some other things. They will bring lot of so-called evidences that it was a big violation. This is a reason why they lost and the other things. If they will win no more than 20%, they will be not very much committed to continue such complaints. They will continue harsh talk, hate speech, calls for killing some people. I think this will be in this way. And I want to remind that participation rate for previous parliamentary elections was about 44, 45, 47, even 50. And if some candidate will win from citizens number 25, 26, in the end it will be more than a half. And because a lot of people, when hearing some research, some investigations, public polls, and looking that this is 30%, 40% or 25%, they cannot, they are not analyzing in this way. All of us need to understand that the participation is very much important. Of course, the frustration among people is high, and a lot of people are hopeless. Some others waiting for green card and other measures for leaving country. But I am personally very much interested to involve to the elections as much as it is possible voters. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounded like concluding remarks, but I'll give you a chance after. Boris, just a minute or two, your final thoughts about the campaign process, what to expect. You know, we've all been covering elections for many, many years. It seems like it's the same thing over and over again. Just to share your thoughts, please.
Unfortunately, I have to say that the achievement that we had in December 2008, when we had the best 18, yeah, when we had the best elections in the history of Armenia, according to the respect to the law and let's say, tolerance to each other's, the participants, and in general, the public was very much excited with the process and with the outcome. So unfortunately now we will have backlash, but at the same time I think that all this process that we are facing now is a good lesson for the future in terms of developing political culture. I talked about media behavior, and just one example, maybe it is not the major problem, but it shows how different we are comparing to the past. During these meetings with the potential voters, candidates are still using for their promotion children, yeah? Which is against all civilized norms and standards. But when you are watching Armenian TV, you will almost not see that episodes, which means that people understand that this is bad. It is better not to show in the air. And this means that people are rejecting this type of pre-election campaign. And that is why I think that this is a good lesson for our, let's say, future education as a political nation, as a democratic society.
Thank you. Excuse me. Some final thoughts, please.
I'm using this quote more than 30 years. American historian William Dunning saying that great opportunities meeting to everybody, but not everybody understanding that he met with great opportunity. And a ruling party lost this great opportunity, unfortunately. But as I am feeling, he understood. They understood that their mistakes. I am not sure that they will implement all the revolutionary agenda what they lost. For the society, I am really believe that general or common or collective wisdom of society is much more higher than political leaders or political people are estimated or evaluated. I believe that the people will make their choice, and results will in general satisfy to the society. So this is general expectation that people will participate, and the results will be not problematic. And I don't believe to these talks about the civil war and some similarities. Thank you.
Thank you, Levon. Thank you, Boris Navasartian, Levon Barseghian, for this very interesting conversation. A lot of things to think about, a lot of things to look forward to. Thank you to the European Platform for Democratic Elections and the Media Center, and thank you to our viewers for following us. For those of you who are in Armenia and eligible to vote, remember it is your right and responsibility to go and cast your ballot for the future leadership of our country. Thank you so much.